Well, once there is a shift, if you will, we will have, we being the state tax department, will have more precise information, if you will, to monitor the program, and it does take the burden off of the locality to do it. But it's you know, so it's an administrative convenience, and again, it's a gradual shift. It's not unless you're in a residential property transfer situation, there's no impact to you. So it's something that you know, we're doing that has more of a long-term benefit in the administration of the credit, but as far as disrupting or creating any issues for existing property owners, it only comes into play when there's a transfer of property.
I just think since school taxes make up usually in most communities 2/3, 60% 2/3, I think we're going to lose in the court of public opinion. I can understand if we want to have a dialogue about how we're going to fund, for example, education on a different, that's a great opportunity for a task force to have that discussion, but to be kind of gradually doing this, it does cause me a little bit of burn. Just a comment, Mr. Chair, if I have a moment, on the whole property tax cap calculation, what we enacted last year in the budget in regards to BOCES and those type of changes. I do find, and I talk to your staff, they're very responsive. They get back to us very quickly, but there really doesn't seem to be an urgency to really give these districts that true calculation of what their property tax cap will be this year. And that, it's bothersome because here we are February 2nd. Second, third week in May is when these budgets go up to vote. And personally, I don't know if that exception that we approved is really going to be that meaningful. But it'd be nice if we could just put it behind us and move on to other issues we have to deal with. And I just had, and I know you don't run the Thruway, got enough challenges with tax and finance, I'm sure. But in regards to the Thruway toll credits, I remember when the governor introduced it, it was like, that's interesting. Why are we doing this? And I get it. I'm very sensitive to the transportation costs for farmers particularly, and obviously representing 5 urban areas. I want low-cost produce in my communities. We want to eat healthy, the whole 9 yards. But what is the rationale behind this? Because I'm still trying to figure out, after being here in my 4th year, how we're going to pay for the Tappan Zee Bridge. And I don't really seem to get a direct answer. It seems like we wait for surplus, and I get it. It's an expensive endeavor. It truly is a transformational historical project. But do we really have $350 million to toss around to issue this credit? I have not heard one thing from my constituents about this. I can tell you this, if we were having the opposite direction with usually conversation, which is about raising the tolls, there would be a stampede. But I haven't heard much about people saying, please reduce my tolls for the 10 trips I take a year on that throughway. So I'm trying to get an understanding of that.
Well, it's first of all, in terms of how it's paid for from the bank penalties that were, it's a one-time incurrence, if you will. So it's, you know, again, it's meant to address farms. It's meant to address individuals who use the throughway in a very frequent way, and it's also meant to address other businesses. So it's another way, if you will, to provide a credit benefit to those frequent users of our vital infrastructure, the throughway, in the transport of either themselves to their jobs or their goods to market. So it's another business initiative that the governor is putting forth to help us rehabilitate our image as a business-friendly state, a place where businesses will want to remain and will want to come and do businesses, as well as address the individual user.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've been joined by Senator Diane Savino, but Commissioner, I do have some questions I'd like to get to, and I may have to come back for some more, just as Senator Krueger is planning on coming back for some more. First of all, I appreciate your comments about the STAR program. Some of us in the legislature have districts where it's primarily rental housing, but many of us, and I'd say most of us in the legislature, represent homeowners who have to struggle every single day with the heavy tax burden that we have in the state. One of the things that we hear over and over again is the fact that the tax burden is too heavy, it's suffocating in many cases, they want more property tax relief. And the STAR program has really been a lifeline for so many people who are struggling, seniors on fixed incomes. And so this proposal that's included in the budget, the executive budget proposal, basically the way it would operate, and I just want to clarify this fact. So what you're saying is that people would have to pay the entire school tax bill in the fall. That's correct, right? And then they would not get a credit on their taxes until 6 months later. Is that how the program would work?
It would work, again, for those who have transitioned into the credit.
Right, but so the homeowner would have to pay the full school tax bill up front in the fall and have to wait for 6 months in order to get some relief on the back end on their tax bill or on their income tax.
Well, I don't want to be too petty about it, but you know, it depends on how soon they file. We turn around tax returns very rapidly. We're able to do that once an individual files. But again, we're talking about a very small percentage of individuals who are impacted by the shift. And I think in most instances, when people buy a home, they factor in how their taxes are paid. They can be part of their escrow reserve so that they're not hit with a one-time payment. Rather, it is accumulated over time, and that eases the burden, an installment payment plan, if you will. So that's available to, I think, most, if not all, purchasers. And so I don't think the impact is going to be as dire as it may be perceived. Again, because this is a transitional program that is only triggered when there is a transfer of property.
I understand, and so I know it would take a while to work through, but I have to tell you that taxpayers in upstate New York and communities that have homes that benefit from the STAR program, I think would be very concerned to have any changes to the structure of the STAR program, so I just want to point that out. Switching gears, the executive budget proposes to restructure the appropriations of 6 existing programs into 2 new programs, and I wanted to probe that a little bit because there are no cost savings that we can garner from taking such action. So why restructure these 6 programs into 2 if there are no savings associated with this restructuring?
No,
I just want to know what the thought process is behind
sure.
it.
You're referring to our operations budget?
Yes.
Okay. So essentially, we have done some realignments within the tax department, and probably the most significant one has been to, as you know, the Office of Real Property Tax Services was consolidated with the tax department, I believe 2010. And there were some synergies that were achieved right away in terms of just applying the broader administrative, legal capability that the department possessed to this new operation. What we've sought to do during this last year is to more fully integrate that unit into our operations, our processing operation. We're fortunate at the tax department to have some very broad-based capabilities that provide extra capacity that we can apply to other areas, even outside of our core mission. For example, we run a call center and we run a print shop, just for example. But in this particular instance, this is an internal reconciliation or squaring up of our books relative to where this operation now reposes within the tax department. We have maintained the local offices that were part of the Office of Real Property Tax Services that are dispersed around the state. Those remain in place. This goes to more of the core operations function that we've sought to integrate into our broader operations function. So the movement you see here in the approach is to reconcile how that is accounted for.
Will there be any movement of any employees at all?
I'm sorry, I didn't
Will
hear.
there be any movement of any employees at all?
Any movement?
Yes.
You mean adverse movement?
Well, what I mean is, will employees move from one of the current programs into another? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying they're being integrated into a broader, under the leadership of a broader program. The operational portion of this program is being folded into the broader compatible operations that has leadership structure in place and has other capabilities in place. So basically what we're doing is working more horizontally, if you will, to use that term, and we are trying to cluster like functions in like areas under single leadership so that there's better leveraging and support of a function as opposed to just being standalone. I mean, that's sort of been the whole strategic direction of Governor Andrew Cuomo, at least since during his first term, and it continues now, is how do agencies that historically were standalones but have some similar functions and synergies to other agencies, how do we consolidate that to become more efficient and effective because of scarcer resources? And how do we leverage capabilities in a broader way, provide broader application, to, again, not just silo, but to cross-cutting functions. And that's what's happening here. We looked at it, we studied it very carefully. We used a consultant to help us and to sort out where the compatibilities lie and the opportunities were, and that's what we acted on.
Thank you, Commissioner. Switching gears, could you please explain why a jeopardy assessment provision is needed for the enforcement of cigarette and tobacco taxes?
Why? Could you just repeat the question?
Could you please explain why a jeopardy assessment provision?
Oh, jeopardy. Okay, I didn't hear you. Yeah, sure. So
maybe we should have the commissioner come sit up front like some of the...
Yeah, well, it may be me, but a little trouble.
No, I'm sorry about that. We actually have had some difficulties in some other hearings where it's difficult to hear out at the table, so.
Okay, well, thank you for your forbearance. In restating your question for me, I follow it. So you asked me about jeopardy assessments, why we're asking for that.
Yes, with cigarette and tobacco taxes.
Sure. Well, it's a tool, it's an enforcement tool, collection tool that we found to have very fruitful application in the sales tax area. And basically what drives it is a circumstance where revenues are at risk that are otherwise owed to the state, basically trust monies, if you will, where a vendor collects money, taxes, that are owed to the state of New York. It's not their money, okay? So that's why we call it trust money, and really they have a fiduciary responsibility to remit that money to us. But what happens in some instances, we have vendors who are not vigilant or compliant, quite frankly, in protecting those monies and remitting those monies, those taxes to the state, or they otherwise or in an at-risk circumstance. So this is a tool that allows us to segregate these monies, if you will, to go into a distinct account and really provide more control, if you will, and assurance that ultimately those monies will redound to the benefit of the state. So it's a compliance tool for lesser compliant and at-risk vendors.
So what you're saying is under the current tax provision, which is Section 478, there are some issues with adequately addressing the collection of cigarette and tobacco taxes from a potential or alleged tax evader. You're saying that that section needs to be upgraded somehow?
Well, I'm just saying there are instances where, especially in the cigarette tax area, where, yeah, we need the additional capability when we identify an at-risk vendor, if you will, who's responsible for remitting the taxes, that we can assert greater control earlier, if you will, in the process to make sure those taxes are paid.
Thank you. Now, the jeopardy assessment provision is authorized under Section 694 of the tax law for the collection of personal income tax. And how often is the jeopardy assessment used in the collection of personal income taxes?
I would have to get back to you on that. I could not.
Great, that would be helpful. Thank you. And just following up, we were wondering what factors go into deciding what jeopardizes or would delay the payment of income taxes.
In terms of a refund?
Well, yes, and you know, as you look at this, what kinds of things go into that as far as delaying any kind of payment of income tax refunds?
Sure. So basically what happens, again, because of some great technology and talent, that marriage that we have, we essentially can electronically interrogate every return, and we do. And we're looking for outliers, if you will, so a multitude of factors in an algorithm that are applied electronically relative to identifying and forming a profile for that particular tax return. And so when we identify outliers, if you will, those are subject to further inquiry and scrutiny by our select team that has specialized training and ability to further scrutinize those particular returns. So that will delay a refund, but outside of that process, generally we, if things are in order, we turn around the refunds very quickly. We take that responsibility very seriously, because in those instances, that's money that we recognize, that's money that belongs to the taxpayer. And in essence, what we're doing is performing a reconciliation function.
I see. And so through that electronic interrogation technique, is that what you envision to do regarding cigarette and tobacco taxes? The same type of approach?
Well, the volume of, again, what has happened with, we have a strike force that was formed a few years ago. And so this strike force works with multiple law enforcement agencies to stop the sources of the flow of untaxed cigarettes into New York. And so that's in concert with federal and various multi-state and local intrastate jurisdictions. And what is, smoking cessation has occurred as citizens have become better informed about the dangers of smoking. So the tax has gone down, but our assessments on untaxed cigarettes has trended up over the last 3 years that the program has been in effect, in earnest. So the revenue collected is somewhere around $2.2 million in the last fiscal year, or the fiscal year ending this March. So the volume of it is not the same as other taxes, if you will. We don't, I guess the other way to say it is that we can bring more scrutiny to it just because of the lesser volume.
Thank you. At this point, I'll turn it back to the Assembly. I do have some more questions, but I'll come back.
Thank you, Senator. Assemblyman Oaks.
Thank you, Commissioner. like to go back just on the throughway tolls a minute. With that being a credit, certainly we're going to be aware of it. We'll have it in the news, I'm sure, and whatever. But generally, if this becomes law, will we have a process of notifying those who are frequent users of the throughway so that they make sure they're aware of their opportunity for the credit?
Sure. Outreach and communication is an area that I think the tax department has done a good job and is one of our strategic focus, if you will, as we move forward, both in terms of we have a robust website, for example, but we're looking to make it even more navigable and easier to use as more and more users turn to that means or that mode of understanding what the requirements are and what available programs are. We also have an outreach function. We have a small business or business tax ombudswoman who's actively engaged with the business community. Myself and my team and a number of our subject matter experts are constantly engaged in communication with the various trade, professional societies and associations. So we're looking at every avenue, if you will, to proliferate awareness of benefits that are available. And then we, of course, target our communications to affected groups, especially when there's a new benefit. The other thing that has helped us is our, again, the amount of data that we receive, third-party data that we apply analytics to help us better identify, forecast where we do need to target and prioritize our efforts. So I think there will be a very robust effort and recurring effort to create awareness about the benefit.
One of the provisions in the governor's proposal mirrors one somewhat that he made last year on Parental Choice in Education Act, so providing some opportunity for tax credits for individuals that want to donate to some of our private schools. Last year, I believe, there was $50 million that would go toward private and 50 toward public. The governor's proposal this year, or if those numbers, it was 50-50, I think, in percentages. This year, it's looking at only 20 on the public side. Was there a rationale in the proposal to go less toward the public school as opposed to the private this year?
Well, as you identified, Assemblyman, there is $70 million for the Education Scholarship Program tax credit, and $50 million of that is for education scholarship organizations and $20 million for credits for contribution to public education entities and school improvement organizations, et cetera. In terms of you know, the allocation of the funding, that's something that I would, if you want more insight into that, I would have to get back to you on.
Okay. Thank you on that. One other provision that I just wanted to briefly go into was there is a fines as a part of the proposal on tax preparers if they understate an individual's liability for their taxes. Is that going to be, well, there's a couple different things. One, there's a two-level enforcement, the fines being determined if they are reckless or intentional, having higher, just trying to get an idea how that might be determined, whether it was, you know, inadvertent or other? And if on the inadvertent side, are we going to, if there's any claim, mine gets sent in and, there's a $5 addition error, is my preparer now going to be liable for up to $1,000 because, they carried the wrong number?
No, that's not our focus. Our focus, like most proposals that eventuate from the administration, from agencies, are really driven by experience with in practice. And the practice, what we have observed is that we have some tax preparers, and let me just pause for a moment to make sure I'm careful to differentiate the different preparers. So we have the licensed attorneys, the licensed CPAs, and we have enrolled agents. The enrolled agents, all that is, enrolled agents receive their status from the IRS, the federal government. For those category of preparers, professionals, our function, we don't regulate because they're regulated in essence through their licensure organizations. The tax preparers, some 43,000 that we regulate, are those who fall outside of those particular categories. The concern is that we have seen recurringly tax preparers take positions or claims for refunds that are not supported by law. And that's really what we're looking to get at with this penalty, if you will, that we stop and penalize that type of more egregious, unfounded behavior, if you will, on the part of tax preparers.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Senator.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Our next speaker would be Senator Krueger. Your first is here, though, so I think she'll
round two. Following up actually on Senator Young's questions about tobacco tax issues. So several states have moved to a digital high-tech tobacco stamp, California, Massachusetts, Michigan, and have found that the high-tech encrypted or digital type of tax stamp makes tracking counterfeit tax stamp cigarettes much easier and increases revenue. And actually the CDC, Center for Disease Control, came out with a report recommending that more states explore this new model of tax stamp. What kind of research have we done here in New York?
I'm not aware of any specific research that we've done. I can tell you that to the extent you want to know, I can confirm for you and get back to you what exactly we've done in that regard, if anything. What we are looking at, though, is creating more of a test and learn environment, if you will, within our agency across a number of areas, and in the criminal enforcement side, which is where cigarette tax typically falls. We are looking to develop more of a capability, if you will, around any number of investigations, forensic or whatever. So part of that is to enhance our digital capability is really the relevance of the point I'm trying to make here. Whether we thought about how it specifically would apply to cigarette tax, I don't know. I would have to get back to you on that.
I would like you to get back to me, and I would urge you to at least explore the findings from the other states that have been implementing, because it seems initially that it is assisting both their criminal justice system and their tax system to be able to better track and identify both counterfeit cigarettes coming in from who knows where, and also track, correctly for tax purposes, actual cigarettes that have been appropriately stamped and taxed.
Yeah, the only comment I would offer is that, with regard to cigarettes, is really it's the physical capture, if you will, of the contraband. So unaided, I don't know how, without that, the digital enhancement will enable that capture, because you do have to interdict, and find the product, if you will, and then assess whether it has the appropriate tax stamp or not.
I don't disagree. I think what's interesting and unique about cigarette taxes, and it was interesting that it was the CDC, right, doing the study.
Yes.
We put taxes on cigarettes, obviously both for tax purposes for revenue, but because it's a public health win. The higher the tax rate on cigarettes, we have learned, the lower the take-up of smoking, which is a public health win. So if in fact we're not setting up a system where we can assure correct taxes are applied and collected on cigarettes, we're flunking the public health part of the assignment. Because if they're cheaper, more people may in fact smoke them, particularly young people, and our goal was to stop that from happening.
I get your point, and I would suggest, though, also in furtherance of your point, that the effort is working, because we're seeing the tax collection go down on appropriately, legitimately taxed or cigarettes that have paid their tobacco products that have complied and paid their taxes. So that revenue stream is decreasing, so is working and furthering the public benefit. But there's always room for improvement, and we believe in continuous improvement at the tax department.